Good afternoon, class. Everyone in your seats. Thank you, thank you. Today we are going to talk a little bit about a very important scientific discovery that happened that still affects the scientific world to this day. It's going to build upon our previous lesson where we spoke about fossils. We've all seen now how fossilized bones of dead animals kind of give us a picture of what their lives were like, what their diet may have been, what their environment was. Most animals, from the dinosaurs to whales, leave behind some record of their existence, what kind of predators they may have had, and essentially what life was like for them in their habitat. We're going to talk about today a very famous researcher that made his discoveries and his contributions to science not from studying fossils of long dead animals, but by studying living animals at the time. This man's name is Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin studied finches, among many other things, but that's what today's lesson is going to be about. I'll give you a little bit of history. In the year 1855, Charles Darwin and crew were voyaging on the open ocean on a ship. They came across the western part of South America. Here they discovered a chain of remote islands. These islands would be later called the Galapagos Islands, cluster of volcanic islands, very diverse habitats. What did Mr. Darwin find there? All sorts of animals that hadn't been found anywhere else in the world, including to this day. It's a very unique ecosystem. What was the most interesting for him were birds, specifically finches. Charles Darwin discovered 13 different species of finches on the Galapagos Islands. Now, at that time, when he first found them, he wasn't exactly sure if these were all separate types of birds, because they looked very different from each other and from the birds on the mainland. It wasn't until he brought those birds back with him to Europe that he started really looking at their characteristics. There was a variety, as you can see, it's on your handout, a variety of different beak shapes, different colorings, different sizes. And this led him to come up with his theory of evolution. Now, in case you're not familiar with it, evolution is a change in characteristics of populations over successive generations. What that means is that generation after generation after generation, you can have different traits that emerge, different characteristics, whether they be beak shape, size, colorations, and you can say that if they have adapted those traits to fit their environment, then they have evolved. That is the basis of evolution. It's kind of the umbrella that today's lesson is going to fall underneath. You might ask yourself, well, how do things evolve? Charles Darwin theorized that things evolve through adaptation. Adaptation is closely related to, it is a direct result of, natural selection. Adaptation is when organisms change over time. We're not talking about you getting taller and older. We're talking about a species that changes from one type of species with red feathers that moves to a more wooded area and its feathers now become brown. You could say that based on its environment, this species has adapted from being red feathered to being brown feathered to more blend in with its environment. That's where the natural selection comes from. It had to blend into its environments because of survivability. Natural selection states that an organism that better adapts to their environment tends to thrive, tends to survive longer, and when you survive, you have more chances to create offspring and pass along those changes with them. Now, let's go back to Darwin's finches. Everyone on your handout, please look. You will see that your handouts are blank. I'm going to need you to label some parts of the finch with me. The parts that most changed through adaptation, Darwin noted were the beak that evolved based on the diet of the habitat of the bird on the different islands, the wings, which based on how often the bird had to fly, where it mostly found its food sources, would be larger, smaller, sometimes the coloration changed, the tail, and the legs. The legs were important because it mattered where the bird perched. Was he in the dirt looking for bugs? Was he on the tree branches looking for bugs that lived up high or down low? The general concept is you could take a finch with a plain old beak and put it on one island where the readily available food source was little caterpillars that lived in flowers. Over generations, based on its food source, you could say that that bird adapted. It mutated, which is the change in structure of a gene, which is passed down to future generations, and it could mutate a much longer curved bill. What would be the purpose of this mutation? Yes? Exactly. To better be able to eat its food source. That same bird, or that same species of birds, if you took it to another set of islands, as it was in this case, and its primary food source were little red bugs, you might see a completely different adaptation. You might find that its beak became more stout, harder for crunching on the hard beetles. So we've got the same species in different environments, different habitats, that will mutate and adapt based on natural selection of its food choice. And it will become different species. You can see some of the 13 species here that Darwin found. This incredibly long bill was used to forage for insects found inside of bark. Incredibly adept at peeling the bark back and getting at those insects. This bird has a top hook and a low lip. Now this searched for beetles in a very wooded land. This is a very thin, very long beak adaptation, similar to this one, that was used as a nectar feeder for flowers. So all of these birds ate different things. Based off of that diet, they adapted for survivability to be able to better eat these things. Now there's a couple more concepts I want to talk about. Darwin's finches are a prime example of microevolution. Microevolution being when major evolutionary changes occur within a species or a small group. A group of finches travels to this island with the red beetles. They get red markings and a shorter beak. A group of finches travels to another island with the caterpillars and the flowers. They get longer curved beaks. Both of these adaptations are suited for their habitat, for their environment. They're suited based on natural selection. Yes. Okay, so why do things change? So there is a constant battle in nature for resources for food. It goes all the way from plants up to tigers to elephants. You can see outside now that plants actually compete with each other for sunshine. Their leaves are broad, they grow tall to get more sunshine. They may even fan out, blocking other shrubbery, other plants from achieving the sunshine, which is the food for plants. Animals also fight for food sources. Species will reproduce in relation to the food that is available to them. Does that answer your question? Good. Excellent. Now, Jeremy, will you help me? Will you pass these worksheets out? Thank you so much. Jeremy's going to pass out some worksheets. We are going to have you label the parts of the bird that are there. We're going to go ahead and erase these. See if you guys were paying attention. Go ahead and label your birds. And when you're done, pass those forward. So we want to talk a little bit about macroevolution as well. Another term, major evolutionary changes happen to whole groups over much longer periods of time that lead to entirely new species. This also applies to Darwin's finches with the mutations. Darwin had a very interesting theory that only the most fit of any species would survive, and thus if you had a mutation, if a species had a mutation that allowed it to be more fit, then it would survive and procreate, creating more offspring. Mutations occur, of course, when a mutation occurs that favors survival, it almost is always related to a food source. That animal has a greater chance to survive because food and water are the fundamental building blocks of all carbon-based life form on the planet. Mutations are passed down through generations, through offspring. So especially if it's a dominant trait, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So if you have this beak and this beak's finch that mutate, you are likely to get, this is a dominant trait, you're likely to get more beaks that are more adept at eating the red bugs. That's the idea. Now, Darwin also discovered that there were no large predators to these birds, so they were basically left to their own devices to do the two major things that most animals do when there are no large predators threatening their existence. They eat and they reproduce. All right, we're going to pull up a short video that goes over some of this information. And all right, let's watch that. All right. What did you guys think of the video? Really informative, right? Talked about the mutations, talked about natural selection, talked about the predators, evolution in general. Talked about the different species and their colorations and how they had changed over time. We're going to break into groups. We're going to pass out some marbles, some popcorn, some string, some cups, some different things. What we're going to do, class, is we're going to mimic different types of beaks that may have been on these finches. I'm going to give you some forceps, some kitchen tongs, some blunt pliers. Those are going to mimic the different shapes of beaks. You're going to have a minute to collect as many pieces of rice with them, as many marbles, as many unpopped popcorns, and as many strings. And we're going to time this, and when we're done, we're going to graph it. We're going to break into groups. Dominic, Gabe, Mike, Bryce, I need you in group 1. Paul, Lucas, Brittany, group 2. Jeremy, Sean, Thomas, Caden, and group 3. And Giancarlo, Mark, Brad, and Eliza, group 4. I'm going to walk around the groups to see your progress and results and see if there's any issues. All right. All right. Excellent work, everybody. Really appreciate that. We got some really good data. All right, now I'm going to ask some questions. Of all of the different tools that you had and of all the different foods that you tried to use to simulate these beaks, which food was the most difficult to get into the cup? The rice. The rice is small. I could see that. Did anyone else have difficulty with anything? Anything different? The strings? The strings were kind of a simulation for worms, and I can see that being difficult depending on the beak tool that you were using for that. The marbles were one of the easiest. Okay, the marble had the hard shell, could be like trying to eat the beetle. Probably easier to pick up with the tongs than the pliers. Now, which simulated beak was the easiest to use? Brittany? Okay, so you liked the forceps. You thought that those were pretty easy. Okay, I could see that. I could see that. Which changes or adaptations to the beak tools do you think would be beneficial? Say for the marbles. Giancarlo, what do you think for the marbles? Oh, you think that, okay, so more of like a hook to be able to get underneath it, to grab around it? Okay, it's a great idea. I could see that. Bryce? So more of a thin pecking kind of beak, Kind of like this one right here for getting at the worms. Absolutely. That makes perfect sense. Okay, next I need to pass out these for vocabulary. We've gone over evolution, adaptation, natural selection, microevolution, macroevolution, and mutation. We'll go over those again. You've got some vocabularies to fill out. Remember, evolution is a changing characteristics of population over successive generations. Adaptation is when organisms change over time. Natural selection is organisms that better adapt to their environments, tend to survive for longer. We've also got microevolution, which is more of small steps over time. Macroevolution, which takes longer but is larger steps of adaptation caused by mutations. A mutation being the change in structure of a gene, which is also passed down to future generations. Excellent. Excellent. If you guys have any troubles, I'm going to go one-on-one through the class and see if you guys have any questions about anything on the worksheet, any of the vocabulary. Okay, yeah, I can see that. All right, pass your worksheets forward. All right. So let's talk about these guys for a minute. What do you think? What about the concept of mutation appeals to you? Is there anything that you see in your daily lives that would lead you to mutating? Not you specifically, but to understand how mutation leads to adaptation through natural selection, which in turn is evolution. Okay, no, that's a great point. Completely understand. All right, I think you guys have done an amazing job today. I want to end with this. This is a quote. If anyone can tell me, raise your hand when I'm done, if anyone can tell me who said these words. Mutation is the key to our evolution. It has enabled us to evolve from a single-celled organism to the dominant species on the planet. This process is slow and normally taking thousands and thousands of years, but every few hundred millennia, evolution leaps forward. Does anyone know who said that? Jeremy. You would think it was Mr. Darwin, the way we've talked about him today, but in fact it was a different famous Charles Xavier of the X-Men. You guys laugh, but the themes that run through the comics and the movies, while far-fetched, have real-world science behind them. We as humans may not be able to grow blue fur or shoot lasers out of our eyes, but we have evolved certain traits that have allowed us to survive this long on what can be a pretty hostile planet. The next time that you have to run laps in gym class, be thankful that you've adapted, that you've mutated, that you have evolved to the point where you can sweat. If you don't believe me, just look at a dog on a hot day over there panting. Does anyone know why dogs pant? Yes. That's right. Dogs don't have sweat glands. Dogs evolved in a different way than humans did. We evolved sweat glands in order to cool our bodies down. A dog does not have that adaptation. It has not evolved that, so it cools itself in a different way. It cools itself through its mouth by panting. Did you know that humans have another adaptation? We are among the greatest long-distance runners on the planet. It's true. It's true. Long ago, in the hunter-gatherer days, our stamina, our ability to run at a fairly reasonable clip for a long period of time allowed us to chase down our prey. That is something that has allowed us to really thrive. The two tools that have allowed us to thrive the most, though, on this hostile planet have been our brains and our thumbs. These two tools are the real difference in establishing mankind's place on the planet. Charles Darwin's finches had their beaks and their colors, and humans have their brains and thumbs. Thank you.